Yeah, thank you so much, Aram, for coming to our podcast and saying yes to us to come and do this conversation with us. We talk about cultures and different parts of the world and world issues and all these things. So you are like a perfect person to have on this podcast because you're used to.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I'm deeply humbled that you guys considered me to come on, and I consider your podcast one of the most important ones out there. So it's very humbling that I'm on there.
Oh,
That's nice. That's
that's
nice
so
to
nice.
hear.
Yeah.
That's nice to hear. We're all about culture. Umuco means culture, and we are always welcoming the more challenging conversations, but always striving to have positivity, come out of it in a positive light, or as positive as it can be.
Yeah.
But we recognize that we're all human, and we all have our issues. We all have our slight differences, but at the end of the day, we're human. We share the humanity, and that's what we're all about.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's why I think platforms like yours are so important, because you invite dialogue, as opposed to some other platforms out there where they purely have one-sided discussions. It's just a back and forth between making points. And I really think, based on what you guys are doing out there, seeking understanding, especially through an audience like this, is super important.
Yeah.
Thank you. So you are a leader. You're in law enforcement. You do a lot. You do a lot of community service, and that's one of the most inspiring things about you. And you also share about it. You are on social media, which is unique to find a cap on social media who's open and having these dialogues. Would you share a little bit about your upbringing, your journey, and what led you to become a public servant and the work that you do right now?
Yes, absolutely. So growing up, I was actually born and raised on an army base in Seoul, Korea. So my ethnicity is Korean. It just so happens my dad was stationed in Korea. I met my mom there, and I was born there. And about before I turned 1, he was reassigned to Fort Lewis, which is in Tacoma, Washington. And so that's where my journey in the States began. So I didn't know any better, other than I grew up on an army base till I was about 5. So those early influences, being regimented, having to, lock it up for the for colors and reveille. And it was just normal to see other kids do that. And my dad had the same upbringing. My grandfather was in the army in Korea as well. And so my dad was raised in Korea. So identifying with 2 different cultures was always part of my identity. They were very proud to be Koreans and very proud to be Americans. And I think at the time, Americans really had a hard time understanding how can you have pride in 2 different cultures, because we weren't quite the melting pot that we are today. And, Asians, especially Asians, were new to America. Growing up, I didn't know I was Asian. I didn't really wasn't aware till maybe junior high school. Because where I grew up, all my friends were my friends, and we never once talked about our differences. So I think I always had that background of wanting to invite people to my culture. People would come over and they would see different foods, different furniture, and I'd be like, "Oh, this is normal to me," and they'd be like, "Okay, if it's normal to you, it's fine to me," and they were immediately accepting. So that's kind of the theory I use today with my social media. I always wanted to be in the military. I didn't want to be a police officer. Kind of going to go off in a little tangent here, but my mom had a flower shop in a rough part of Long Beach and in the rough part of South Central LA. My dad had a video shop in a rough part of East LA. So I used to see police on a daily basis, and what I saw them do was nothing that I wanted to do. They were rough and tumble, and back then it was a different police culture. Police basically told you what to do, and you listened. And if you didn't listen, you got taken care of. And that was before body cams and cell phone cameras. It's amazing how technology evolves just everyday life. But I didn't have that in my heart to be a police officer at all. Sure, I played cops and robberies growing up, like every other kid, but I had my eyes set on being the 3rd generation Army. When I went to college at Cal State LA, when I told my parents after high school I was going to join the Army, they made me promise that I would go to college first because they were all enlisted. And
Yeah.
they said my life would be easier in the military if I went to college and had a degree, then I could go in as a commissioned officer. And so I did. Who am I supposed to argue with 2 generations of military experience? So I
Yeah.
went to the Army, but it was, college, it was my junior year that a recruiter approached me just in the quad. I was on my way to Chick-fil-A to get lunch and didn't even think about police work. He stops me and says, "Hey, do you speak another language?" And I said, "I probably have the first grade equivalent of the Korean language. Good enough. We need you. We need people of diverse culture." And I said, "Well, I'm going to the Army." And he said, "Well, this is your Army paycheck compared to this is what your police paycheck would be." And my eyes just went, okay. This is something I should strongly consider.
Now you're talking.
Yeah. So, and it afforded me the opportunity to serve the community I was in. So I joined the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department in 99. I was in the academy in September and I graduated in February of 2000. And I've been a police officer ever since. And I've seen the evolution. And shortly after I graduated, we had 9/11 in 2001. After that, the country came together like no other. It was just one of those things where police officers could not do anything wrong. They were loved and revered by everybody. And then shortly after that, as we got into 2008, 2010, we saw some things on television that really brought our profession down. And people weren't willing to have those difficult conversations. And honestly, there wasn't really a platform to have those difficult conversations. So as you see it, without those difficult conversations, we just went downhill even further. Fast forward to 2014, 2015, the events happening in Ferguson and St. Louis and in the South, just amplify that even more. And that was the tipping point. So that was the antithesis of 9/11. So essentially the pendulum swung.
Yeah.
Ironically, that's when I started my social media. I had gone to college. I had attained my master's degree in public relations. Another segue. You're going to find them full of segues. But my original intent when I was getting my bachelor's was to be a broadcast journalist. I wanted to be a sportscaster. And one of my professors said, and looking back, I think he was well-intended. I don't think he was being racially biased, but he said, "Aram, you should really consider not being a sportscaster on television because there are no Asian sportscasters on TV." And I think he was giving me professional advice, telling me to go maybe the written journalism route. But that really struck a chord with me because I've always challenged whenever people said I couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
So I pushed forward and I put that aside and became a police officer. Fast forward, I had a choice to choose, now getting my master's degree, we have Asian newscasters all over the country. So I said, okay, maybe if police work doesn't work out, I can do this broadcast journalism thing.
Yeah.
Back and got my journalism, public relations, and communications degree. And I teach that now. I teach at California Baptist University on those 3 subjects. And I think my experience as a public information officer with the police department and my experience on social media really gives me the credibility as well as the degrees to teach there. But going back to social media, I think you're relating to why I started that whole thing. I felt like law enforcement officers up until that point were told, stay off of social media. It's dangerous. You can get in trouble. You can lose your job. And I think I had a really good foundation of how I can grab attention on social media and stay away from being in trouble with policy and procedures. And it worked. There's a lot of cops on social media that have platforms. I think mine had the fortune of growing in the way it does because I have empathy, and a lot of the posts I put really resonate with other people. And that's kind of the hallmark of leadership, in my opinion, is empathy. And I think when you can command an audience, command followers, because you resonate, you say something that resonates with them, that's a good recipe for growing a platform. And I don't make any money
No.
on social media. I do get some sponsorships. That just comes with having a larger audience. But I've been approached to sell my podcast platform and join another a group that performs podcasts and to get paid for that. But I really feel like that causes you to compromise what you're able to say.
Yes.
Now you're Now you're kind of subject to what they want you to do, what their agenda is. And from the very beginning, my podcast has always been, I say what I want, try not to offend anybody, but it's the truth. And sometimes people don't want to hear the truth, even in our profession. Nobody likes to hear that law enforcement officers can be corrupt. Law enforcement officers can do illegal activity. Does it happen? It happens all the time. And I think what sets me apart from other cops on social media is I'm not afraid to call those people out. I'm not perfect. And again, that's empathy. I know that the opportunities are there to get in trouble because I've been in trouble as well.
Yeah.
So, being real about it, I think brings in a diverse audience. My audience is not 100% pro police or law enforcement. It's people that saw that I'm open to having those discussions, that maybe have skewed views of law enforcement. And the next thing you know, we develop really good dialogue and they have a really good understanding of, maybe some perspective, different paradigm shift, if you will.
Absolutely. Right. And we believe that dialogue is the beginning of change. And sometimes change can be hard for a lot of people.
Yes.
But when we allow it, really, we can be able to change our communities when we can have the open communication. And say
well,
something.
It's so refreshing to hear, holding space for that conversation, the dialogue. And I can just imagine how challenging perhaps it is to be in your position and, it be seen as unpopular sometimes. And then you are subject to all sorts of backlash, whether it's negative or positive. I'm just curious, were you always like that? Like when you started your social platform, were you always kind of in that mindset, like I'm ready to take whatever comes to me, or was that something you developed?
Yeah, I was an only child growing up, and I'm still an only child. That's proof that you don't always have the right things to say. But yeah, I have sometimes I don't feel like an only child. I have 4 kids in a very busy house, but I think the way I grew up, not having siblings forced me to be really social with people. And I don't know. I just think I really have a good grasp of reading people, which is very useful in my profession today. But I think it took a lot of practice growing up. I made a lot of mistakes socially. I was socially awkward at times and I was socially perfect at times, but it was those opportunities that made me really develop who I am today. So I think that's useful now. And it gives me confidence to have those open conversations. Because, you can invite people to have these dialogues and they might have a specific question, but that'll segue into another question. You got to really be able to be open and honest. And if you try to sugarcoat an answer, that's when you get in trouble, because now you're sugarcoating, you're filtering your answer instead of giving the pure answer. But for the people I target, isn't necessarily that 10% of the demographic that will die hard support police. It's not the 10% that die hard are anti-police. It's the 80% that are kind of on the fence, one way or the other. And I think if I put legitimate, credible content out there, it'll really sway people to have a broader understanding. Maybe not have them jump to one side or the other. That's not my goal, but it's to target that 80% in the middle that might be on the fence.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're not, like you just said, you're not trying to convince people of certain ideals, but more so just trying to create an understanding and to continue the learning process of this whole thing.
Right. And I'm unapologetically me as well. I mean, I do have some biases myself that I will put out. My most recent post was a little bit of anger involved behind it, because you heard about the 13 military personnel that died over in Afghanistan, and that's a controversial subject. And I stayed away from that for the most part. But one of my followers sent me a private message indicating that one of the soldiers that died was a follower of mine, and that he talked about my posts all the time. His dad was a captain with the sheriff's department, and mom was a deputy with the sheriff's department, and he was an explorer and had goals of becoming a deputy sheriff himself. And although I didn't know who he was, I kind of felt something. I mean, this guy was willing to follow me, share me, in a way looked up to what I was doing in law enforcement. And I was saddened that I didn't get to know who he was. I didn't, as you know, with your audience, you can't know everybody, although you'd like to. If I could reach out to everybody and have more than a one-sided conversation, I would. Because that kind of took me down yesterday, and I made a post about that, and I was a little angry with, I was not trying to be political, but I was angry with the failed leadership. I think the way they extracted the Americans in Afghanistan and the way they left behind very important supply chains was a sign of failed leadership. And so some people came back at me and said, please leave the politics out of this and, honor somebody without politics. And to me, it wasn't politics. It was just failed leadership, and leadership wasn't necessarily the president. Leadership was everybody in between that had to make those decisions. Right. So could have stepped up and said, hey, this is wrong. This is not the right way to do things. And in a lot of ways, if you want to say that it relates to law enforcement, it does. We have officers that stand by idly when they see something that's wrong. And hopefully this gives them the courage to say, well, if Aram's willing to go up there and call people out publicly, I should have no problem doing it to people I work with.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important thing, because what you just mentioned, like being able to be unapologetically yourself, and you're, like you said, we're not going to be right all the time, and sometimes we say things that from our emotions. Like, for example, Alex can relate. Last year. This is a TMI. We might have to edit it out, but last year when George Floyd was killed, and there was a lot of anger between law enforcement and inner city or Black people in America, especially a lot of people were angry, people of color, about what was happening. And because of those bad apples, we were going to talk about it anyway, but because of those bad apples who go out and do harm to the community, it made the whole law enforcement look bad. Yes. But also it made the Black boys also feel scared, yes. Terrified. I remember I was also scared. I wouldn't let Alex drive around the city by himself. I would have to go with him, like everywhere he will go. And he was something interesting. He started wearing glasses. And I said, why are you wearing glasses? Those glasses, you don't have eye problem. And he said, well, this way I look safe. Yeah. And then but I was, I think one incident was another kid that was shot, and he was, I think, in the hospital. And then Alex also posted something. We took it down, so you won't be able to see, but he posted his feelings, or how he felt about, how he was scared about, these Black boys being killed and scared, all the feelings he was feeling, he posted it. Nothing, targeting anyone. But then later on, how I speak to law enforcement at the museum. Later on, I reposted it. So later on, someone in the law enforcement saw the post, and it became a whole controversial thing. But the first time when Alex was posting it, there was no, saying everyone is bad, but just because he didn't differentiate. These are the bad. Let's make specific. This is bad apples. Yeah. It became controversial, and we got in trouble for it.
Well, we received backlash naturally.
Yeah.
And it was a time of high emotions, obviously, last year, and I don't know. We took it down just because we wanted to avoid further impact on the speaking career, and me felt like it could be distracting to the overall conversation ultimately. But I think that's just an example of, as public figures, we say something, it will bring a certain type of reaction.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't necessarily feel exactly how I felt about it last year. Emotions have died down a little bit, obviously. But I don't know. I mean, I think it was just
Yeah.
it was a moment of
Yeah.
high emotions
Yeah.
and
I
Mm.
totally can relate. Earlier
Yeah.
this year, I made a similar post. There was a video. I just happened to be scrolling on Instagram, and I see this
Yeah.
video of a police officer chasing somebody outside of a liquor store.
Mm,
And the guy had a 6-pack of beer or a 24-pack of beer, and he runs. A foot pursuit ensues. And what happens after the end of a foot pursuit? A fight happens, right? Because the bad guy doesn't want to go to jail, and the cop
Mhm.
wants to take this guy to jail. It happened somewhere in the South, but in LA County, a beer run is, isn't even going to be prosecuted.
mm,
So I said something about why on earth are police officers chasing petty theft suspects? And this comes from 21 years of experience, 12 of which I was a supervisor. And, I travel the entire country speaking at law enforcement stations and law enforcement officers. So I have a lot of experience in this world. And maybe I didn't qualify that statement enough by saying in LA County specifically. So I had
yeah.
all this backlash from law enforcement because law enforcement across the country works at different speeds. In LA, we work at one speed. And if I went to, I don't know, Marina Del Rey, we're working at a different speed, right? So
Yeah.
that might be the most important thing for that officer at that time. And it might be a big deal. But the optics looked horrible. I mean, really, the rest of the world is saying you're beating up a guy for stealing a 6-pack of beer. And then I had so much backlash saying, well, that beer is important to that hardworking family. And I had young officers say, you're just compromising now. And now you're not doing your job. Your heart's not in it. And that's not true. We're just in a litigation happy world these days where that officer, if it happened in LA County, would need to not justify whether it was justified in use of force, whether it was necessary. And
Mm,
the burden in California now is necessary over justified. So was it necessary to chase the guy? Absolutely not. He already had video on the subject. He knew who he was. He could identify him by face, and he would just make a police report, and it would be submitted to the district attorney's office to be filed by way of complaint. Now, what this officer did was cause this guy to have to go to the hospital. 2 officers have to take this guy to the hospital to get what they call an okay to book. They have to medically clear him to get booked, and it
mm,
takes these 2 officers out of the field. So, in the broader scheme of things, which is something that supervisors learn how to do, they look at it from a more elevated perspective.
mm,
Now we have 2 less officers patrolling the streets, and we have taxpayer-funded money paying for the medical bills of this guy. So was it worth it at the end? No, absolutely not.
yeah.
There's
Mhm.
other ways to do that. But at the time, uh, I didn't know that, in my head, I was fully justified. Everybody's going to agree with me when I posted this, and I got the backlash.
And
But,
it's like,
so I know exactly where you come from. And
yeah.
I think the people that criticize the most are the ones that lack empathy.
Mm,
And I know you probably empathize with that post tremendously, and I empathize with that post tremendously. But the people that don't have a whole lot of life experience don't see what your perspective is. They don't see where you're coming from, and they're the ones that seem to be the ones that want to speak the loudest when it comes to opposition.
Mm.
So I'm very forgiving. And for that reason, that's something I've learned over the years. I'm very forgiving with people, and I left it on there, and I wanted to show people that you can still meet that opposition with grace. And
mm,
I would reply with comments like, thank you for your perspective. I appreciate it. God bless you. Stuff like that. And,
right.
um,
Mm.
you know, that sometimes it elicits a response that says, thank you for not engaging in an argument with me and having good dialogue. And sometimes it makes people angrier because I didn't take the bait. But
Yeah, I mean, some people they really do want
Yeah.
they're triggered, we all
Yeah.
have about
Yeah.
stuff, but they
Yeah.
really do want to have that sort of like back and forth spat.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's not worth it. I have more important things to do. If I got paid per word, maybe I'll do it. But it's really other people are watching too.
Yeah.
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 My assistant pastor at my church, I didn't
Mm.
know he had Instagram at all. It just doesn't seem like the type that would. And one
Mm,
day tells me, "Hey, I saw your post." I'm like, "Oh," and I'm like immediately thinking, "Did I say anything wrong?" This is my assistant pastor at church, and but you never know. It's a constant reminder that you have to look further down the line. And
mm,
you have further aspirations with your speaking career, and I may have further aspirations in other fields as well. And something that you post or comment or say from 20 years ago is going to affect that, because the researchers will find it.
Yep.
I know.
Yeah, and that's a good segue, kind of
Yeah.
talking about. I wanted to bring up my dad.
Yes.
He was a former Dallas police officer back in the 80s. I think he did it for like 13 years or
Was
something.
a captain, right?
I don't know. I don't think he was a captain. I don't know
Okay.
the specifics. He's talked to me about it, but I don't know the specifics. But he did talk about kind of his experiences on the streets, and with talking about specifically accountability within the police force. And what I was surprised about is he described the force as almost like a fraternity. Like when you go through the academy, he told me like you become these best buddies with these guys naturally, and there becomes there's this sort of protective thing that you have for one another, and kind of touching on the bad apples, because he had told me that, like, I think he didn't put a number on it, but like 80 to 90%, most police officers are good people. Like they're really, really good people who just want to do good by their community and by the people who they serve. But then of course you have the bad apples, the people who go into the force for different reasons, for ulterior motives, and for whatever that looks like. But specifically the accountability, do you find in your 21 years of experience that it's easier to have to hold each other accountable whenever you see certain things that you're like, I'm not comfortable with that, or you see your friends talking about certain things that you're not comfortable with? Do you feel like it's easier now to hold each other accountable than it was before, than it was 21 years ago?
Yeah, I think you hit it right, the nail right on the head. For someone like me, I think it's really easy. But let me go back to qualify this answer. I'm going to say you said something earlier where there's people that 80 to 90% that are good cops, and I think that's very accurate. It's very close to accurate. The statistics show that 99.5% of people that enter law enforcement are people that had previous leadership experience. Either they were in the military, they played team sports, they were in student government growing up, whatever. They were in situations where they had to know how to socially interact with people. They had to be social leaders. I played football in high school. I was a captain all 4 years. So I felt like I was groomed in that leadership environment. I grew up with military parents and grandparents. I had that leadership environment. Right. And I think that's what this profession attracts. Because if you're crazy to go through a very rigorous background, where they go all the way back to your past relationships, they look at your finances, they talk to your neighbors, they talk to your former classmates, your former employees, not because they want to see if you've done anything stupid. They want to see what you've done in your life to step up in a leadership role. And that's who background investigators look for specifically. And then you have that small percentage of people that are motivated because they were the exact opposite. They didn't have notoriety. They didn't have that social interaction. They weren't thrust in that leadership position. So they craved something that gave them immediate status. And sometimes wearing that badge and uniform gets you that status, and that motivates a lot of people too. And a lot of those types of people get weeded out through the background process, but a few sneak by. Less than 1%, the statistics say, sneak by. And those people, when they become police officers, we call them monsters, because now you got this guy that is motivated not to do the right thing, but motivated by a status, and not just status amongst the community, but status amongst his peers. And sometimes looking like a badass in front of your peers causes you to compromise, your policy and procedures and your ethics. So if you're not grounded in your morals, your ethics, your core values, personal core values, you're going to be led astray. So unfortunately, it's those people, and sometimes the good ones that become corrupted, the ones that come in and with the intentions to do good, but somehow get compromised and corrupted. That makes the percentages skew. So now you're looking at a more accurate numbers, 80 to 90% of people go through their career in a straight arrow. And then you have the 10 to 20% that are now tempted by other things, because we are exposed to drugs. We are exposed to lots of money. And there are people that will justify it over the years. And, I work really hard for this. This drug guy doesn't, and there's millions of dollars here. They're not going to know if we take $100,000. And that's an actual thing that happened with the LA Sheriff's Department. There was a narco task force that did that.
Wow.
In Rampart in Los Angeles as well with Rafael Perez. But we learned from those mistakes. Back then, I could see how they felt it was easy to get away with. But today, you have officers that join the job because they want to fight that corruption even more. They believe in law enforcement so much. It's like, you know what? I'm going to join this job so I can clean from the inside out. So a lot of people, there is a new generation of police officers that do that. So as far as internal accountability, I think a lot of people don't realize that it occurs. Just because it doesn't make the news doesn't mean that it doesn't occur, which is thankfully so, because if every instance made the news, it'd be horrible. But you can do a public records request. All that information is made public. If you send a request into your local police, let's just say you're curious about your local police department. How many times had this officer been placed on discipline? How many times was this officer placed on administrative leave for an investigation? And what are the allegations? You can request all that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, as a sergeant and as a corporal, and even as a police officer, I've had to pull people aside and call them out. I've had to arrest one of my own officers before, which is not fun. But, I would be lying if I called myself a leader serving the community if I didn't do those things.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. That's a hard job, especially when.
Yeah. That's,
I think, do you have siblings? And I think it's kind of like putting your siblings in check, because you're absolutely right. You do become very close with these people. You endure, 6 months of the academy with them, and you develop a bond. And personally, it makes me upset when someone puts me at risk by them doing something stupid. So I'll call them out. It's just like putting your brothers and sisters in check. And that's the best way for me to describe it, that I think people can relate to.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I had a thought, but I just slipped away.
Yeah.
No, you're talking about the newer generation of police officers.
Yeah.
My dad described it when he got into it as public servants. Like you serve the public,
Sure.
Instead of what can, I guess, in certain eyes be seen, or law enforcement can be more of an aggressive, have more of an aggressive connotation. But this newer generation who feels like they're trying to do the right thing, kind of heal the corruption from the inside. I feel like I've seen this whenever you're speaking to some of the younger police officers versus some of the older ones, because I don't remember who said it, but like when I'm watching Dydine speak and she's telling her whole life story to these cops, you could see some of these guys, the older guys, not all of them, but some of them, you can see their eyes glaze over. They're like, okay, this young black girl is just talking at me and I don't really know what I'm supposed to learn here. But then there's some of the younger guys, younger girls, women, they're like, they seem very interested and they want to take in this information and, like you said, be more empathetic, because as a way to connect with the community and learn more leadership skills. And it's just fascinating listening to you say that. I don't really have a point. It's just more of a stream of thought here.
No, I think you're right. I feel different because I can feel the energy from the audience. And sometimes they come from different parts of the country. And some of the parts you were talking about, the cop who was running after the guy with a beer or something like that. And sometimes when I'm signing the books, I get really interesting feedback. Sometimes older guys, one person told me once, when I was signing the book and talk has gone well, I've got all the love, a lot of love, but one bad comment will set you all way back. But he came and said, I think it might have been in his 60s. And he said to me, I wonder if these people who are complaining about policing should go back to Africa and see if they survive a day. And I'm an African woman.
Yeah.
And I'm signing his book.
That's a clear case of someone that had a clear thought that was not articulated correctly. You know, I think he was probably trying to do a compliment, saying if people could relate to you, maybe they'd have less to complain about. But yeah, I don't think anybody that can hear your story can honestly say that they weren't moved by it one bit. And I felt at the end of our session that, you know, it only lasted a couple of hours, but I felt like I was with you for an entire journey. And that was incredible. And the fact that you're here smiling and living a functional life and is a real testament to who you are as a person, because I think it would break a lot of people, and including myself. I endured a lot personally. And I don't necessarily share it as much because my kids are on social media as well, so they see their friends see, and I don't want them to know how my I'll cut to the chase because I don't think they'll listen to this right here. But so my father committed suicide, and he had suffered from PTSD. And shortly after that, I found out my mom had stage 3 cancer, ovarian cancer. And she beat that. We beat it together just to have her get murdered 6 months later. And she was in front of her home, and someone, you know, kidnapped her and shot her in the head. And that was in 2015, which is what triggered me wanting to get on social media as well. Everything came down. I felt like I needed an outlet. But, you know, you saw tragedy. I experienced tragedy, not to your magnitude, but it was, I think, if you don't experience that, it turns you into someone that can't relate to other people. So that's why I always preach empathy, because, you know, I grew up in a you know, not the greatest neighborhood, and my parents had businesses in not the greatest neighborhood. And then when I go out to these scenes, people see me as a police officer, a professional, and or you don't know, you can't relate, but I can tell them stories of how I grew up, and even up to murder. I go to these murder victims and I tell them, I'm sorry, I know how you feel. And a lot of them just say, okay, that's what he's supposed to say. And a lot of people say, well, you don't know how I feel. You don't know what it's like to lose a loved one. And I can tell you as a matter of fact, and I'll give them my testimony about my mom. And, you know, that really puts a pause in them. They understand that the people behind the uniform are human. And in my end goal, that's what I want. I want people to understand that we don't get programmed. We don't stick a microchip in our brains when we join the academy. We're actual people that join the academy, and we have our different reasons for wanting to join. And sure, the job changes some people, but I think if you're grounded enough, you'll end up with someone like me. And there's tons of people like me that they just don't have social media. So.
Yeah, right. Wow.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
God, we almost have the same story. It's very interesting because my dad had PTSD, as you know, from me sharing my story. And my mom in 2016, she had ovarian cancer. She survived. She's not, you know, she was able to go through surgery and everything, and so she survived. But one of the things when you were sharing that, and I hear the story, you know, from both your parents, what I've realized is that women are very strong. They go through so much, but also our bodies, sometimes it can't take that stress. And that's one of the things the doctors told my mom, that from her cancer, it was the internalizing all the stress that she had gone through over the years. So I guess maybe that's why our stories are almost similar.
Yeah, no, none of this, we would never know any of this unless we had these conversations, right? I don't know how many police officers you guys have approached to bring on your show that maybe have said no. But, you know, and this podcast may have gone a completely different direction than what we intended to, but I'm glad that we're able to talk about our personal lives, because at the end of the day, we should really be humanizing law enforcement.
Yeah. And I was going to say the same thing, is because we're having this dialogue at the core of this. And like I said at the beginning of the show, is we're all human, and we all have these very, very human experiences. And that makes me think about something another police officer had said in a previous course a few weeks ago. It was a woman who had said something about every police officer in this room has some form of PTSD, is experiencing some form of trauma. And it's kind of heartbreaking to think about that, obviously. But what it's also saying is that we're all human. We all have shared experiences, and we can all relate. And should we have the empathy to connect with that, then you'll see that we're not that different. you know, and those are just the police officers in the room. But then you talk about the community who has all sorts of, you know, trauma or lived experiences that they don't know how to express, or they maybe have never shared with anybody. And, you know, it's just such a simple thing to have a dialogue, have a conversation about this. And, you know, so long as you're willing to have it and not bite each other's heads off, I think it's a healing thing in and of itself.
I think when this whole COVID thing finally goes away, hopefully one day, I invite people that want to have these intimate moments with police officers. They can do it for free. They just go sign up for a ride along at their local police department. Even if it's just an hour. I mean, look how much we've been able to unfold here within, I've lost track of time, but
I did too. Who cares?
It's probably been what, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. But we've been able to unfold so much. Imagine what you can do one-on-one as a member of the community and a police officer, sitting in a car going on calls. Now the community member can see what the officer goes, you know, from the officer's perspective when they go to these calls. And then they can talk about that afterwards, and they can say, hey, this is why we handled it this way. And the community member can ask questions. And I guarantee, you know, out of the hundreds of ride-alongs I've ever had in my car throughout my career, nobody's ever left feeling more confused than before they came in. So it's a great outlet to have. You know, if you're really serious about seeking understanding, do a ride along. It's fun. First of all,
doing it. We are. I feel like I want to do it.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of people can benefit.
No, I 100% agree with that. I've never done. I'm trying to think back.
I didn't even know that program exists.
Yeah. Well, my dad had talked to me about it, and I feel like I've done some form of a ride along with my dad. Sure. He just go to these, you know, neighborhoods that I didn't grow up in, some of the harder, you know, lower income neighborhoods, I would say. And he would just teach me like, oh yeah, I used to do, you know, my rounds over here, and, you know, this and this and this happened over here. And just like life lessons, you learn not only about the person, but about like these situations, and they're far more complex than you would ever think. And then, you know, we're all human. We put our humanness in those situations. Like, okay, that it's not that, you know, confusing, or it's not as weird as I thought it would be.
No, and this just triggered a thought too. Conversely, officers need to do the same thing. They need to find an activity that's not just their everyday police work to engage in the community. So years ago, this actually just stopped with COVID. So 2.5 years ago was our last one, but we had this turkey basket program. So during the holidays, companies would donate the fixings, you know, ham, turkey, all the sides, because we have a lower income neighborhood, and we donate toys and turkey baskets. And I remember one year going to a family that signed up, and we delivered all this food to them. And the little girl, she was probably, you know, 7, 8 years old, grabs my hand, takes me and says, look, do you want to see our Christmas tree? I'm like, yeah, this is our first Christmas tree. And it was a construction paper, green construction paper, maybe about 2 feet tall, that she made in school, and, you know, pasted, you know, bulbs and stuff on there that she made out of paper. And she was so proud of that. And that made me cry right on the spot, because we take for granted some of the things that we, you know, growing up, like having a Christmas tree, having the smells of a Christmas tree. So me and my partner, when we walked out of there, and this was all off duty, this is just, we're volunteering our time. So we were able to leave. We go to the nearest Christmas tree farm, and I think they were like $50 at the time. So it didn't cost that much. You spend that more than that in coffee a month. So we bring them the tree, and this girl just hugged the tree. And the feel, you know, the feel of the needles and stuff. I mean, it would always stick in my mind, because that was unique. And officers, we would never have experienced that unless we put ourselves in that position too. So conversely, just as important as it is for community members to go on ride-alongs, it's just as important for officers to insert themselves in the community as well.
That's true leadership there.
It is.
It's true leadership. Yeah.
And can I just say, this is, I didn't expect this conversation to be negative in any way, shape, or form, but it's so refreshing
Yeah.
speaking with you, and I think just kind of in the discourse, the general discourse of social media and all these headlines, negative headlines about law enforcement and politics and all these things that muddle up what is really simple and just like baseline humanity, and just be there for each other, be there for your community, and sort of step away from this individualistic mindset to more of a community-driven mindset. This conversation, it's so refreshing because it's a reminder, you know, and I know I can get sidetracked by the headlines and start to maybe believe certain things. But we're, again, and I can't stress this enough, the empathy that we all have for one another and the humanity between this, it's so refreshing. And I'm already thinking about how our audience would take this and learn from this.
I hope so. I sincerely hope so. I am. You know, and this is me. I mean, you know, when we met over at the class, I was very open with you that I really wanted to connect with you guys somehow, because I really feel like I represent a lot of cops out there. You know,
you do.
80 to 90% are people just like me. And, you know, maybe you know, now that I think about it, you may see, we judge immediately on the surface, right? Like a police officer has to make a split-second decision based on what they see in the first 15 seconds of a person. And the community has to do the same thing. When they see police officers, they look at a guy in uniform. Well, this guy has a scowl on his face, or he doesn't look friendly. He's not going to be friendly. You know, and I hope that the police
might be hungry, you know?
So that's the truth. Yeah. I make a certain face too if I haven't eaten my breakfast. But oh, it's funny. But, you know, I would encourage any officers that might be listening to this, because I'm going to share this link on my page. I'm going to direct officers here to get some encouragement from this as well, and realize that the people look at us, and I guess we're sort of brainwashed too. Like we have to be have this command presence, and sometimes this command presence doesn't always include a smile. And I would argue that if an officer would smile more and be more approachable, it makes everybody less guarded, right? So now it's just totally deflated any kind of chance of going into an argument or some sort of dispute, because now you've just kind of taken the wind out of those sails by smiling, because nobody expects an officer to come up and smile.
No.
No, a smile can be very disarming. It's just leading with love, you know, as much as you can in the situation. I guess it's hard to remember in the moment when you know, adrenaline's high or whatever, but
oh, absolutely. There's times, and I don't want to take away from the importance and dangers of our jobs. There are times where you have to turn it on, but you have to be multifaceted. You can't be one type of person. And if you are one type of person, then maybe this job isn't for you, because there are times where you're going to have to sit with a grieving mother, a grieving father, or a child that just lost their parents. And if you are just stuck in one mode, that's not going to work.
Absolutely. That actually makes sense. It was also when we're talking about smiles, even in real life, going around with a very, you know, stoic,
you have a scowl on.
You're not giving, because a smile can change somebody's day, you know. When I walk around and somebody smiles at me, that face, I never forget that face. And it's almost like a love, and, you know, I see you. It's almost like a sign of recognition. Like I saw you, and I feel like we can use it in any environment, and it definitely helps.
I'm guilty of it too. Like in the gym, I don't want to talk to anybody, so I have my headphones on, and I have that "don't talk to me" face.
There are moments.
But you know, opposite wise, there's environments where if I'm smiling at people at the gym, they may think I'm flirting with them.
I mean,
that's very true, because you're like, oh, I'm gonna sidetrack here because we can have fun so much here.
Oh yeah, for sure.
One thing, you were born in Korea, and your family moved here. You lived both cultures, but also learned how to be proud of both. Sometimes for I'm from Rwanda. Alex
Mhm.
is an African American man.
Mhm.
So in the society in America, let's address the elephant in the room. Is that how they say
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Racism. There's racism in America, which makes your job also extra harder, because the country is divided. There's a lot of the headlines are divisive, I would say. And within your job as someone who you're Asian American, do you experience hatred? Especially in the last year, we've experienced a lot of hatred towards Asian communities.
Mhm.
And as someone who's in the street, you probably have seen more than we have seen. What would be what's your take on that? What's the message? What have you learned in the last year? Personal story or something that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, I think I'll lead in with the topic that I think most people want to hear. Does racism exist in law enforcement? Absolutely.
Mm,
Um, I I think it exists in certain parts of the country more than it exists maybe in metropolitan areas,
Mm.
and I'll tell you why. In the 21 years I've been a police officer, I've never experienced racism as a police officer. I've never seen police officers do a racist act. Do I see some prejudices? Absolutely. There are some people that believe people that drive loud exhaust sports cars are the worst people on earth. These are traffic cops, right? Uh,
mhm,
so they are already discriminate or have their prejudices against guys that drive import cars with loud exhausts. Um, and then how about people that drive fancy sports cars like a Maserati or a Bentley through the neighborhood,
Yeah.
and it might be a poor neighborhood? That automatically triggers some prejudice as well. This guy is only here to collect his drug money. Never
mm,
mind, he might own the apartment complex, right? And that goes back to having open-mindedness. People that don't have these life experiences don't have the ability to see from that higher perspective. They see from their paradigm, their little tunnel of life.
Yeah.
mm,
So that's why if I ever get into a position where I'm the sheriff or chief of a police department, I'm not going to be one of those guys that looks for people that had squeaky clean backgrounds. I want people that have gone through life. I want
mm,
people representative of the community. The community I work, we do a great job of doing that. We hire people that grew up in the community or have family in the community. Why?
mm,
Because it causes them to have a connection, an investment into the community.
Right.
And I think
mm,
that needs to be the case for every police department. So, one day I have grandiose ideas of being put in a position to make those tough decisions.
Mhm.
But I
yeah.
think, just in my experience, I see that's a winning formula for success. Now, personally, as an Asian American, when I told you about my mom's flower shop, this incident happened in Long Beach. I was carrying out some flowers um, to the back of the delivery van that was parked in the back, and our family was one of probably only 3 Asian American businesses in that community. And sometimes we'd have walls spray painted with the circle, the slimy eyes and stuff like that. I was carrying some flowers back, and some kid riding a bike down the street just slugs me, just punches me in the face. Defenseless. I couldn't even
Mm,
see where I was walking really until the last second when I got caught with this. And that was a moment that I could have really easily said, that kid that hit me, all kids from this neighborhood are bad, or being Asian American is bad. But no, it was an opportunity where I actually remember saying this to myself, well, I'll never cover my eyes again when I walk. It was a lesson. And the only reason why I think people go immediately to color or, anything that separates us is because of the way they were raised.
Yeah.
I think if you're raised at home thinking people that are different than you are different, you're going to immediately go to that when something negative happens. And I've seen
mm,
that time and time again. Like, oh, and we're only one generation removed from segregation, right?
Yeah.
We weren't too
Yeah.
far along ago. And I think with TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, instead of using that to remind people where we came from, it's almost distancing ourselves from that. People
mm,
don't realize. I mean, the atrocities in Rwanda did not happen that long ago, but
Mhm.
people, but people immediately when they think of genocide think of our Jewish community, and there's only a handful of them alive in the country, in the world left. And instead of utilizing social media to capitalize on lessons, building lessons from people like that, we're forgetting about it, and we're moving forward. And now we're doing the box crate challenges, milk crate challenges, and that's more important than what's going on in Afghanistan and what happened in our history. But I think if you live in a metropolitan area where there's more races and cultures, it just becomes a part of your life. They're your people. But if you're part of an area that's more segregated, that's where I've seen a lot of the racism occur in law enforcement and stuff. And it's just going to take some time and evolution and some really good upbringing to change that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I was a substitute teacher for a year after I graduated college. And for the longest time growing up, whenever I experienced any sort of racism in Texas, where, it's one of those parts of the country where some people don't have any problem sharing their negative emotions about you.
Yeah.
And for the longest time, I couldn't understand it. And even with my dad, and both of my parents growing up in the South, they taught me and my brother about what racism, what prejudice looks like. But I never really personally experienced like a personal attack. I was never really called the N-word, hard R, like, as a prejudice, someone was disliked me. Never experienced any of that directly. And so it was very subtle. And it took me such a long time to understand what this was and why certain kids believe the things they did. And so fast forwarding, when I was a substitute teacher, I looked at these kids, like these, I don't know, 10, 11-year-old kids, and I would hear these things. These kids think they can get away. They can whisper something in the corner and teachers won't hear it. We hear everything. And you're like, why? Like, it's kind of like, it raises your eyebrows. Like, I can't believe the kid just said that. Like, and so where do they learn these things? And then I get to talking to some of the teachers, and I'm like, so are all these kids kind of talking like this? No, not all of them, but the kids that do, they learn it from their parents.
Yeah.
And it made me realize, like you said, we are not that far removed from segregation. A lot of these dialogues are still happening at the dinner table behind closed doors. And so just having empathy towards that and being like, okay, so these kids learn these, it's generational. And so how do you break that chain? How do you have that conversation with someone? Like, I heard you say that, but maybe, don't say that, but maybe think of it in a different way.
Human nature tells us, everybody knows what difference between right and wrong. But some people need to be told in certain subjects what's right and wrong. But deep down inside, you understand if you're doing something resonates in you. Oh, maybe that was wrong. And you don't quite know what was wrong about it. You have to be told.
Right.
The useful part of us being so connected around the world is that chances are you'll run into something that tells you that this is wrong or this is right. So I think it's just going to take another generation for this to be removed. I saw an interesting article that showed what the future Americans will look like. But back in the early 1900s, Americans were very Caucasian. And then as we move forward, African Americans came to America, and then Latin Americans came to America, Italian Americans, and then in this century, this generation, Asian Americans. And it's funny. It kind of runs full circle, but it shows the very first people that inhabited this place was Native Americans.
Yeah.
Kind of had dark skin, Asian eyes, high cheekbones, the Anglo nose. And we went away from that. And then it shows the future Americans 100 years from now, another generation looks just like the Native Americans do. A little Asian, dark skin, Anglo nose. It's just funny how we go full circle.
Yeah, it's like circle of life.
But when the point of that was everybody's going to look, there's so much mixing. My kids are mixed race. There's so much of that's going to occur because there's just so much, I don't want to say variety, but there's so much more people that you're interacting with here that you're not going to, if you're in Korea, mostly Koreans out there, chances of you marrying another Korean and having kids with another that look Korean are going to happen. But in places like America, that's not going to happen. You're just exposed to so many different races and cultures. Yeah. The chances of you intermixing is just going to, that continued procreation is going to lead to more of a mixed looking person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that in of itself will probably eliminate a lot of the differences.
Another difference. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
As you think about it. Yeah.
It is. But I don't want to play devil's advocate here, but I mean, you talk about a lot of people will find, we have a tendency to find division within anything.
That's true.
And
that too.
With Rwanda, it was, very specific stuff like
little things,
the length of the fingers, the skin tone or the shade of
the
like
height.
the light skin versus dark.
I guess.
And hopefully we can eliminate some of that stuff. Or I just wonder, like, what would it take to hypothetically just eliminate any sort of physical bias?
Yeah. I think that as long as there's ambitious people in the world, and people that are willing to corrupt that ambition to get to what they want, take shortcuts in life, and that's just part of human nature. And it's not necessarily a factor of how we can eliminate it. I don't think that's possible. I think it's how do we live with it. People
really,
it may not be a popular theory to have, but it's just, I've only lived this life, so I can't really tell you what happened in previous lives. But if you look at the history books, it just has always existed in some form. Somebody has always stepped on over the other person. Yeah. And even like, as you said, if we look at the Greek culture, everybody was Greek. They weren't different, but they stepped on each other because they came from different parts of Greece. You came from Crete, you came from Lesbos, you came from, I ran out of Greek countries. Different regions caused you to be different, and even though you looked identical, the first question was, "What region are you from?" It's like, okay, so that people seek out differences, and maybe we'll get to a point, maybe in the future. I don't know. I know 100 years ago, people never suspected self-driving cars, but 100 years, it's hard to see that now with the way the world is. But if we're hopeful, then maybe that'll happen. But just based on history, it seems like people will always find a reason to pick out people's differences.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I was reading a book. Actually, it's this one right here. It's called A New Earth. Can you see that?
Yeah.
A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. He wrote another book called The Power of Now. I recommend it if you haven't read it before. But he had said something about this concept of human evolution is not gauged by the things that we develop, like technology, science, like, because, like you said, we didn't have self-driving cars before. Flying cars may be a thing at some point in the future, but that, even medicine, if we cure cancer, that would be great. That would be a great accomplishment. But human development is like, we're still humans. We're still the same humans, just doing fancier things. Or as some people, we're apes with nicer, shinier toys. Right? So how do we, it's always an interesting thing. Like, what do we have to do to evolve as humans? Like to evolve our consciousness, how we view the world, how we treat each other. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I think the person that can, nail that one down is going to be a best-selling author, because make a lot of money. Because that's escaped me. And I wouldn't consider myself a philosopher. Yeah. But not getting too, I don't want to say too religious here. I'm a Christian. I think that's another unique thing I do on my platform. Is a lot of people stay away from that, but I openly talk about God. Yes. The Bible gives us a clear-cut path of how to do that, and that's in of itself a different war. Now there's differences amongst Christian denominations, and different religions. You have Muslims versus Christians now, and it's just any difference you can point out, it's going to happen, and it's. If you can find the answer, I'm willing to listen.
I didn't mean to bring up the high concept stuff, but it's but it's good to strive towards wanting to better yourself, and like you said, I mean, I was raised Christian as well. Like, the guidelines are very clear. I mean, we somehow along the way we muddle things up and we take things out of context, whatever. But it's fairly simple and straightforward to be a good person, and it usually starts with just being kind with one another. Kind to people, and not letting the fear or whatever kind of take over how you live your life.
Yeah.
I think it could be going generational too. Now, as you said that, it kind of triggered something with me. It's my parents. I have the piano that I have in my dining room is the same piano I had since I was 7 years old. My parents wanted me to. They pushed piano on me. They pushed academics on me, and they wanted me to be the best at whatever I did. They wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer. And in my family, becoming a police officer was kind of like, oh, well, we wasted all this effort on you. Growing up, and I still have friends like this that put their kids in the best baseball schools and all that stuff. And I used to want that for my kids before I had kids. I used to like, oh, when I have a boy, I'm going to put him in the best pitching school or football school or whatever. And after I became a police officer for a few years, all those things became less important to me. What became more important to me that they were good people. So I put all my eggs in the good people basket for them. I don't care what they do in life, really. And even though it sounds weird being a college professor, I don't care that they go to college or not. Because to me, if you go to a trade school and develop a skill, it's just as important and needed in this world as it is getting another person with a degree, right? That might be struggling to find a job. So I don't care what they do. I'm going to push them to be the best at what they do, whatever they want. But I also want them to be good people. And I think you hit it right on the nose, Alex, is you have to, it all works out when your intentions are to be a good person.
Right.
Yeah. To be a good person, be happy. That takes me to empathy and vulnerability. And as a police officer, as a dad, as a professor, what does a vulnerability mean to you?
I think for some people it's hard to come out, but for me, I'm just an emotional basket. Anytime I get an opportunity to share and talk about it, it's therapeutic for me. So I'm not shy. I'm not one of those guys that's shy to being vulnerable.
Yes.
I mean, if you followed me for any length of time on social media, I think you know that I'm a pretty vulnerable guy. My last few posts have been about subjects that resonate with me. And exactly, yeah. Speaking from the heart, I wear my heart on my sleeve. Everybody knows that about me. I think it's just a personality thing. It's hard for police officers because, as I mentioned before, we're guarded individuals. We have this command presence thing where we have to be hard. I don't care if you're a 5 foot tall, 100-pound officer. You might walk around like you're 6'4", 300 pounds. You have this giant, larger than life persona about you. And we just need to shed that. The most refreshing thing, I used to work with this guy named Craig. He just retired, and God bless him, because all he wanted to do was retire and go fishing on his own property. He moved over to Idaho so he can do that. Oh. But this guy was the real life Wreck-It Ralph. I don't know if you ever saw that Disney movie. Yeah, his forearms are huge. This guy is a walking of a man, but he was so gentle. He was a former missionary. He's a missionary in Korea, so he spoke Korean. So that's where we had that little comment. But one of those guys that speaks, you look at him, you think he would talk very unintelligible and be very clumsy, but he's very meticulous. He was one of our range masters at the gun, so he worked very finite tools and spoke very articulately and was very gentle with people. So when people see this guy come out of the car, people would expect this monster aggressive guy, but he would come out and say, "Hey guys, how's it going? Oh, I love your shoes." And people would just be like, "What is going on?" But that vulnerability, that ability for him to not live up to people's expectations of him and be who he truly is, was really motivating. So I think anybody that has worked with him was influenced by that. And I take the same thing. I'm not a big guy by any means. I'm not an imposing figure by any means, but what I do have in my arsenal is the ability to communicate with people. I use that to my full advantage. And if that means having to reach down deep into my vulnerability basket, I'll do that.
I like that.
I like it too. Yeah. And I talk about it on the podcast sometimes, is that vulnerability within men is like traditionally tough.
Yeah.
It's really, really challenging. And specifically within the Black community, vulnerability is not something that comes, it's not second nature to a lot of people within the Black community. So it's tough to sort of find that avenue and not only find that, but the courage to be yourself unapologetically. It's tough. It can be kind of challenging, especially with the older generation who may be like, "What? Why are you talking about your emotions like that?" Blah, 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 blah. I'm like,
say it with your chest.
Exactly. So that was definitely a point of conflict with me growing up. But I'm an emotional guy. I need to express myself. I need to. If I have to cry, I have to cry, and I love it. Because it makes us.
You can't hide who you are, and I think we've gone through that. Like my grandfather, he's old fashioned. He's 94 years old, and he has a theory where he believes being gay, transgender, alternative lifestyle is a new phenomenon brought on by, BPA and the plastic bottles and stuff in the food and stuff like that. And I said, no, Grandpa, I think we're just finally at a point now where people are expressing who they truly are more comfortably, because that people were the way they were for generations. But in the 20s, the roaring 20s, you couldn't come out and be gay. You couldn't, I think that it was only happening because one brave person came out publicly on TV, and that encouraged other people to be brave and come out, and other people to be brave and come out, and it just compounded. And so I don't think it's a new phenomenon. I think it's always existed since the beginning of time. But just like this, we're having this dialogue. If hopefully one person will listen and say, I'm not going to be that hard guy at my department. I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to cry during the commercials on TV.
Yes,
right.
I'm going to, absolutely. I'm going to let people hug me and,
Yeah. Well, that's the best part when a random stranger comes and hugs you. That's and sadly, people don't know what that feels like. That's sad to me that people don't know what that feels like. So go out there and get that feeling.
I know. I think women benefit from that because we can, we love hugs. We love, care. You can, with your girlfriends, if you're watching a commercial and cry, everyone will start hugging you, and you get that feeling, and it's easy. It's like the best
guys like that too. I think guys just fake it. I think they just say, "Hey, stay away from me."
And love hugs as well. So
they do.
Yeah, society doesn't really lend the space for that.
So like I'm a hugger. When I meet people for the first time, they stick their hand out there. I'll do this, and somebody told me one day I'll get in trouble for that, but until that happens, I'm still hugging people.
Yeah, right.
That reminds me of the mayor of New York. Is like, I kiss everybody.
I try not to. I try not to do it creepy.
No.
Yeah.
Well, last point was going to be about mental health.
No, it's tough. I think you have to have a healthy outlet. I had a point where I could have pivoted so I was never really close with my dad. My dad had always struggled with mental health, and he served during the Vietnam era, and it was very tough. And then he was raised by my grandfather, who was in the Korean War, and the two men that preceded me generationally were very hard. They're I don't remember ever hearing them crack jokes. And it wasn't until I had kids of my own that my dad became this softer, gentler guy. And I really thought this was an opportunity for us to rekindle our relationship.
Yeah.
I think I was about 13 years old when we just stopped talking. We were like roommates. We didn't have a relationship. And I don't know if you can imagine what happens to a kid in the most impressionable years of his life when he loses that relationship with his dad. And I could have had that. I could use that as a crutch. I could have said, well, that's how I was raised, so that's how I'm going to raise my kid. And I'm not the best dad in the world. I make mistakes every day. I fail every day with them, but I think I'm a better version than who my dad was. But so I had that happen. And then just at the height of our relationship being rebuilt, he decides he's going to take his life. And that messed with me, so, I was at training at work, and they lived about 7 miles from work. My grandmother calls me and says, "You need to come home right now." So I rush over there, and my dad is not to get too graphic, but he's still in the position that my grandmother found him. And I had to cut him down. And I, just out of instinct, I did rescue mode. And that is very, when I explain it to you, it's still very vivid in my head, that situation. I think people could use that as a crutch or an excuse to say I have a great excuse so I can be crass or angry the rest of my life. That's just not how I want to live. I don't want to be that way. And I feel like I have a greater responsibility to my family as well. My wife depends on me. My kids depend on me. And so, compound that, I made that decision that I was going to move forward. And then what happens to my mom happens just within 2 years. I had every excuse to fail. I had every excuse to just abandon all ambitions and just live miserably. But that's not how I am. I'm a very positive guy by nature. And I had the fortune of discovering social media as a healthy outlet. My initial videos are completely different than what I do now.
Oh, really?
Videos, yeah. So I don't think you guys knew about this, but my initial videos were me releasing with humor. I was always the class clown. As a matter of fact, in the Sheriff's Academy, I was voted the class clown. But that was me compensating and covering up for a lot of, scars and emotions, and humor always did that to me. And so my videos had gone viral and stuff like that, and that's what gave me my initial popularity. I did remember the Kiki challenge, the dance where people were like, "That Kiki, do you love me?" And they're stepping out of their car and dancing. Well, I did that in uniform one day, off duty, fake uniform, and I couldn't do those dance moves. So I told myself I was going to open the door, set it up, and I was going to fall, like pretend like I was falling. And I did, and it went viral. It got like 25 million views. It got put on the New Year's Eve countdown shows on Fox, on ABC. It was on MTV's Ridiculousness. So that's what blew me up. And then when people I built an audience, I said, you know what? Let me say what's on my heart and say if it resonated with people. Well, that made it even more popular because I think I only had like 20,000 followers at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then that just opened me up to a whole new audience that said this. I think the timing was right too, with what was going on in the world. And I think people really resonated with that. And that's just where I'm at now. I think on Instagram, I'm at like 62, and Facebook, I'm at 180, and TikTok, I'm at 130 something. And
wow.
yeah. So it's for a guy that's a full-time cop and not an influencer by any means. I do social media part-time. I think I've a decent audience.
It is decent audio. We can't keep up with you. We're
just starting out. We're just starting out. No, but I mean, at least you use those for it's a positive outlet.
Yes, for educational materials.
I think you use it the way it should be. Someone in a position of influence,
right?
Just and happiness and.
I think to answer your question, like I kind of, you learn this about me. I go off on tangents a lot, but to answer your question about mental health, I think it's important, so important to have a healthy outlet. For some people, it's working out. Some people, it's having a therapy animal. There's a very popular page on Instagram called Cop Humor. And the owner of that page is a Muslim girl, a Muslim American, and a lot of people know that. But she has a therapy bird, which I thought was very unique. When I say this, I imagine a little vest on a bird, but no, she has a therapy bird. But I think whatever the outlet is, people have to have a healthy outlet or something to pay attention to, focus other than themselves. And I think for a lot of people don't know that about therapy dogs. They think the dog provides therapy. No, it's not that. They pay attention to the animal, and it takes attention off of them. So for me, social media is the same way. I get lost in social media. Sometimes at work, if I'm having a stressful day, I just need to walk away from my desk and I'll look at the phone, I'll scroll Instagram, and I'll run into something funny, and that'll just change my mood for the rest of the day. So
I like that, because what you just mentioned, it's something I always, especially in our survivors community, we talk about it, because some studies say that when you come from traumatic events, or it goes in your genes, and your children also have the same thing. And it always really scared me. And I was like, oh my God, I want to have a family, but I don't want my children to have the same trauma I've experienced. And I think that encouraged me to go to find any avenue for my healing journey, not wanting it to go next generation. And I wonder what really inspired you, that said in your mind that you come from these generations. Were you aware that you can have some sort of PTSD or mental health? How did you decide? Was it a conversation?
I don't know. I think maybe the decision was made for me. I really feel like God's using me for a bigger purpose. I just kind of go with it. I pray every morning. I have a little pew bench. It's actually from Long Beach. It was from a 150-year-old church.
Oh.
When they were dismantling this church, I bought it for my wife on Mother's Day. But I find myself using it more. Because I leave before everybody else wakes up in the house, and it's my quiet time. I sit on that pew bench, and I feel like I'm really connected to all the people that have sat on that pew bench and said their prayers for 150 years. I really feel like that it's my zone when I sit in it. I don't know. I just have a deep connection to God because I wouldn't be here without him. I know for a fact, without going too deep into it, that
It's
if
okay.
it wasn't for an end goal of going to heaven, and knowing that this life is temporary, this life would have been cut short a few years ago, for sure. But having God's grace and knowing that I'm here, and I still haven't fulfilled my purpose. And mind you, I've got an award on the other side of this wall for saving a kid's life, drowning in a lake. He was drowned, and a lot of people would say, well, I fulfilled my goal. I fulfilled my purpose for being a police officer. And I don't feel that way. I feel like I have a lot of unfinished business left. I'm 44 years old. I've got another 10 to 15 years left on this job. And in those 10 to 15 years, I feel like what's happened the last 21 years has just been grooming me for what I'm going to accomplish. And who knows what that is, but I really feel like it's going to be a big thing. And if that day doesn't come, it doesn't come. But I just know that I'm prepared for when that day does come. That God's going to use me for that, for his glory, not mine. Because all those awards or anything like that, they're nice wall decorations and good conversation pieces. But the impact I'm going to have on somebody else one day, that's going to be the hallmark of my career.
What a beautiful,
that's
a beautiful way to see life. And absolutely, you have a purpose.
That's that's a beautiful way to look at life. And I'm just kind of staggered by the strength, by of overcoming this horrible hardship. And Dydine, of course, you can relate. I think we can all relate to, in certain ways. But like you said, there are many times where you feel like you could have stopped. You could have I'm done here. I'm not meant for this higher calling. For greatness. It seems like you're yearning. You're reaching for the greatness, the things that are meant for you.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I don't know. There's something in alignment. I sense something your soul is aligned, and that's absolutely. It's infectious.
Yes.
I just want to live my purpose. It sounds very cliche, and some people might say it's just disingenuous to say it's glory for someone else, but it is really for God, because I'm looking back at my life and how many different times God has impacted my life. I shouldn't have been a police officer. I mentioned earlier that I was very empathetic to people that had lived their life. I lived my life. I got in trouble growing up, and luckily I was a juvenile when all that happened. But it makes me a more effective police officer, right? Especially with youth, they think we're cops. We're the man. We're not. But if I tell them stuff that, hey, I know what you did. I know exactly what that smell on your finger is, or I know exactly what that blue.
Because I did it.
Yeah, when I remember this. We went out to a graffiti call at a school, and we stopped some kids on the street that weren't even nearby the school, but I stopped them and I said, "Hey, let me look at your fingers." And the first thing I did was look at the index finger, and sure enough, there was blue spray paint right on the index finger. Because I know from spray painting that spray ends up on your fingertip. Other officers were like, "How'd you know to look at his fingertip? Because it's coming out of his spray can." I'm like, "Well, you never spray paint anything in your life. You're not going to know that it ends up on your finger."
Yeah.
So, life experience. Like I said, I went through a lot of life, and enough experiences for more than one person. So I really do think that God's serving up a purpose for me, and I just want to live it. So there's that phrase, the Great Commission in the Bible, to live your purpose, to spread God's kingdom. And I feel like he's giving me a platform. He's giving me an audience for that reason. It's not for me to get popular, because I'm not, I still live very humbly. And some people capitalize on their popularity in other ways. It's not me. I'm doing it for God's kingdom.
Absolutely. Oh, there's someone once told me, I was not whining or complaining. I was saying, why all this, there's some moments I will be thinking, why do all these things happen to me? And this person told me, things happen for a reason. And even if there's no reason, you find a reason out of it. And one other thing he said that was really inspiring to me was that things happen for us to teach. If we're still alive, we're still breathing, there is a purpose. And it happened for us to teach other people, to inspire other people. And I feel like that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing now, inspiring us and giving us strength through the story, through what you went through, and your beliefs, your strength. Your strength is, Alex said, it's infectious.
It is.
And it is true. It is. So thank you so much for all the work you've been, you're doing for, inspiring people. It's not going unnoticed. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And, I respect people like the both of you. And, if you ever happen to peruse my page and see something that I shouldn't be doing or saying something I shouldn't be saying, keep me accountable, keep me true to my words.
Will.
Yeah. So I have a tremendous respect for the both of you. And if you guys call me out, then I'll know it came from a good place.
Right.
You should call us out too, so that we can keep each other accountable.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
my pleasure. This is so much fun.